So Genesis 16, starting with verse 1. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian maidservant named Hagar. So she said to Abraham, "The Lord has kept me from having children." Underline, the Lord has kept me from having it. It's God's fault. The Lord has kept me from having children. Go, sleep with my maidservant. Perhaps I can build a family through her. Now you have to understand what's going on here. In chapter 15, God speaks to Abraham and tells him that he's going to have descendants, and the descendants will be like the stars of the sky and the sands of the seashores. Abraham comes back and tells Sarah, who is not with child, who has not been able to get pregnant, I'm going to have kids. I'm going to have descendants. What do you think went through Sarah's mind at that point? With who? She obviously wasn't putting herself in the equation. With who? God never spoke to Sarah. You need to pay attention to that as we go through this story. God spoke to Abraham. Abraham had to go home. So Abraham goes home really excited. I'm going to have kids. God promised it. Sarah, with who? I'm older than old. So she determines that she's going to help the process. Rather than waiting for Abram to find somebody on his own, or waiting for God to kill her, or whatever he needs to do in order to raise up these children, she decides that she's going to get involved in the equation, and she tells him, "Here, take Hagar, my maidservant. Go raise up children through her, and maybe I'll be blessed on the sidelines." Latter part of verse 2. Abram agreed to what Sarai said, because God hadn't told Abram either that Sarah was the one going to have a child. So Abram's part of the equation. Maybe this is what God meant. So after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian maidservant Hagar, gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar, and she conceived. Can you imagine what Sarah experienced? All these years trying to get pregnant. All these years being with a husband who was talking directly with God. Being involved in this situation where it seemed God was rejecting her and not listening to her. I would just bet anything that Sarah was thinking, if Hagar can't get pregnant, then it's not my problem. It's a problem with Abram. But it seems like no sooner do Hagar and Abram get together and Hagar is pregnant. Just imagine what Sarah was thinking, what she was going through. The brokenness, feeling rejected by God. Now feeling like she was worthless. Back in those days, God was with you if you were a woman and had a child. If you didn't have a child, it was a curse. And we read through this and we don't stop to think, what was the process of thinking that Sarah was going through in a relationship with God, in a relationship with the way other people looked at her, with her relationship with Abram. Now I'm going to give you a little sideline here as you read through there. You remember there's 2 times where Abram goes to different places and he says, "Tell the king and everybody here that you're my sister, so that they don't kill me because you're beautiful." We miss this. So Sarah goes to the king's palace. She's been wandering around out in the desert. She's got a spa day. She's in here being pampered and taken care of, prepared if the king wants to take her to be his wife. And so she's got this time away from the desert being pampered and bathed and served. How hard do you think it was when God exposed the situation, and before she had relations with the king says, okay, it's time for you to leave? How many times do you think can I just stay one more day? Come on, can I just have spa day one more day? But no, she's back out in the desert wandering around with this guy who sees God and the God who refuses to see her. In the latter part of verse 4, when she knew she was pregnant, Hagar, when she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Did you catch it? Hagar was submissive to Sarai till this point. And now she took precedence in the household because her child was going to be heir of everything. And Hagar begins to act like that in front of Sarah. And you can see why Sarah became so distraught. Because now this person that she had given over to her husband now was beginning to mistreat her. And that despise can be translated many different ways. She began to disrespect Sarah. It was an emotional mistreatment. Then Sarai said to Abraham, you are responsible for the wrong I'm suffering. It's your fault. See, it's God's fault. Now it's Abraham's fault. I put my servant in your arms, and now that she knows she's pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me. Your servant is in your hands, Abram said. Do with her whatever you think is best. The drama in all of this. What a movie. Then Sarai mistreated Hagar, began to abuse her. She was getting even. All of her frustration was coming out now at this one that had frustrated her. She mistreated her to the point that Hagar flees from her. Verse 7. Don't miss this. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from? Where are you going? What is unique in this story right here that we read and we miss? God never spoke to Sarah. But God is speaking to Hagar. If I was Sarah and I found out about it, I'd be pretty upset. God speaks to my husband, speaks to my servant. God will not talk to me. God will not give me a child. God hates me. But God never spoke to Sarah. He said, Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from? Where are you going? I'm running away from my mistress Sarai, she said. The angel of the Lord told her, go back to your mistress and submit. That's a big statement right there. Go back and submit. So many times, even if we've created the problem, we want to get up and run away. We want to blame everybody else in the world. The last thing we want to do is go back to the one that we dislike and submit to them. I've had to do that throughout my life. I had to go back to people and submit to them, not because I wanted to, but because in my heart and through the Word of God, I was told to. It's not fun. And so you need some encouragement along the way, and that's what God does here. The angel of the Lord told her, go back to your mistress and submit to her. Listen to the encouragement. Verse 10, the angel added, I will also increase your descendants, that they too will be too numerous to count. So go back and submit. My blessing is with you. Something Sarah never heard. But here the servant did. And the angel of the Lord also said to her, "You are now with child, and you will have a son. You will name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery." Underline that. The Lord has heard of your misery. And then he talks about Ishmael. He'll be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand will be against him. And he will live in hostility towards all of his brothers. She gave this name to the Lord who had spoken to her. And boy, don't miss this part. You are the God who sees me. You know, in Avatar, if you watch that movie, where the thing they kept saying, "I see you." What does it mean to be seen? When somebody looks at you and says, I see you. It's one thing to say, "I hear what you're saying." What does it mean, "I see you"? All kinds of deep ramifications. I see you. I know who you are. I see who you really are. I see through all the hurt, the pain. I see through everything. I see you. Heavy emphasis on the word "you." Wrapped up in that is, I understand your struggle. I understand your hurt. I understand your anxiety. I understand everything you're going through. I see you. And then he goes on to say, first he said, "I have now seen the one who sees me." What a name for God. She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. "You are the God who sees me." And then she said, "For I have now seen the one who sees me." Right there we could stop and you could take that home. God is so intimately involved in you, you can say, "I've seen the one who sees me." When somebody says, "Why do you believe? Why do you believe in what the Scripture says about God and about Jesus? Why do you believe?" Because now I've experienced the one who experiences me. Now I've seen the one who sees me. I live with the one who lives in me. You know, you can argue my words, you can argue my belief system, but you can never argue my personal experience. Then we go down to verse 15 and 16. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son she had born. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael. Do you know how old Sarah was? 76. She was 10 years younger than Abram. Pretty tough on a 76-year-old lady going through all this stuff. Then let's skip ahead 14 years. When Abram is 100 years old, Sarah's 90 years old, Ishmael's 14 years old. Keep that in perspective as we go to Genesis 21, starting with verse 4. Now when his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abram circumcised him as God commanded him. Abram was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Sarah said, "God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me." And she added, "Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children?" Well, God did. Just about a year earlier than this. Who would have ever believed it? Remember when she heard it, she laughed. She was in the tent. She heard God talking to Abram. He said, "Sarah's going to have a child," and she started laughing. And then the angel of the Lord says, "Why did she laugh?" And then Sarah says, "I didn't laugh." And Abram says, "Yes, you did." That argument is what it was. And now she says, who would have believed it? Well, she obviously didn't when she heard it. Who would have believed it? "Yet I have borne him a son in his old age." You know, a true woman, not in my old age. I bore in his old age. The child grew and was weaned, And on the day Isaac was weaned, Abram held a great feast. Now, weaning was usually somewhere between 4 to 10, 12 months, which would put Ishmael at about 15 years old. Remember, when boys back then turned 13 years old, they started taking on manly responsibilities around the house. You know, working with the flocks, doing the different work that had to be done, helping with everything. So by the time he's 15, he's got quite a bit of stamina. That's very important as we read on. Verse 9, but Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar, the Egyptian, had borne to Abraham was mocking. She saw him mocking Isaac. If you look in Galatians chapter 4, starting with 28, Paul talks about what this mocking was. And it says this, Galatians 4, verse 28, and you, brethren, like Isaac, are children of promise. But as at that time, he who was born according to the flesh, meaning Ishmael, persecuted him who was born according to the Spirit, which was Isaac. Persecuted. In other words, we take this mocking a little bit deeper, and the true word to it means more than teasing. It means more than just making fun of him, but he was tormenting him. He was doing something to torment this 1-year-old child. Puts it in perspective when you hear what Sarah says. Because Sarah says, verse 10, get rid of the slave woman and her son, for that slave woman's son will never share in the inheritance of my son Isaac. Abraham had been the father of Ishmael for 15 years. And Sarah is now saying, reject him. Reject the mom. Reject the boy. Verse 11, the matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son. You could say this matter broke Abram's heart because it concerned Ishmael, whom he loved. But God said to him, do not be distressed about the boy or your maidservant. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. When God has to come and tell you, listen and do this, he would only do that for Abraham if Abraham was really broken over this whole thing and struggling with the decision to be made. And then God gives the promise. Go ahead and do this, Abraham. Verse 13. I will make the son of the maidservant into a nation also, because he is your offspring. God saying, I will be with your son. Though you can't be with him, I will be with him. Go ahead and send him away. Abraham was still brokenhearted. And you can see that in this next part that we read over and we miss. Verse 14. Early the next morning, Abram took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He set them on her shoulders and then sent her off with the boy. Now remember, this boy's 15 years old. She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes. Now, we think when we read this story, this was just a little tiny boy. We're talking about a 15-year-old kid. What is wrong with Ishmael? Why is his mom dealing with him as though he's a little boy, and the boy doesn't want to go on anymore, and so she puts him underneath a bush. They're both to the point of death. She doesn't want to see him die. She doesn't want to see him die, so she takes him and lays him down, and then she wanders off. What is wrong with Ishmael? Either he was a very weakly, sickly child, which could be, or maybe he was just so brokenhearted of being rejected by his dad and sent out that he didn't want to go on. Have you ever been at that place in your life where you just don't want to go on? And you don't know which way to go, but you've just given up. I think that's where Ishmael was. My dad sent me out here to die. One of these days you'll hear of a story of a young man when I was working on the streets in Los Angeles. Young man I found living in a dumpster at 14 years old, who was an American boy whose mom married an Iranian man. And I'll tell you the story sometime about when that young man was put out on the streets just to die because the dad didn't want anything more to do with him. And that story always comes back here. When I met that young man, he was living in a trash bin, as I said, and he just wanted to die. He'd given up. And that's where I see Ishmael in this. My dad sent me out here to die. Then she went off, verse 16, and sat down nearby, about a bow shot away, for she thought, I cannot watch the boy die. And as she sat there nearby, she began to cry. Verse 17. Now listen. Who was crying? Hagar. Hagar sat down to cry. Verse 17. God heard the boy crying. And the angel of the Lord called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, What's the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. Again, God never spoke to Sarah. But he's speaking to Hagar. See, God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Verse 18, lift the boy up, take him by the hand. I will make him into a great nation. Then God opened her eyes. Sometimes we're in so much grief, facing so much anxiety, we don't really see the way out. We don't see God's provision when we're so overwhelmed by the circumstances, until God opens our eyes to see that he's still there with us. God opens her eyes, and she saw a well of water. So she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. Do you know there are many people who have starved to death and died of thirst just a few feet away from the water and the food they needed? They just stopped looking. Sometimes that's us in our lives. We just give up, and we're just so close to finding God's provision, and we give up and we miss it. The God who sees. You know, in the first portion that we read about Hagar, it says, God sees me. I've seen the one who sees me. In the second portion, it's the God who hears. God has heard the boy. God has heard us. To be seen and to be heard means fully understood. God sees through us, and God hears our cry. And whatever distress you might be facing or distress you have right now, I want you to know God sees and God hears, and God is there. That's why I love the name of God, I am. Wherever you are, I am. Wherever you are right now, I am. Whatever you need from me, I am. I'm here, I'm present, I'm with you. I see you, I hear you. Psalm 31, verse 7, I will be glad and rejoice in your love, for you saw my affliction and knew the anguish of my soul. Psalm 139, verses 13 through 18. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful for me. I know that so well. My frame was not hidden from you. And when I was made in that secret place, when I was woven together in the depths, your eyes saw me. Saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before even one of them could be lived. How precious to me are your thoughts, O God. How vast is the sum of them. Were I to count them, they would outnumber the grains of sand. Psalm 53, verses 1 through 3. The fool says in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt and their ways are vile. There is no one who does good. But God looks down from heaven on the sons of men to see if there are any who understand, anyone who might seek him. Everyone has turned away. They've together become corrupt. There is no one who does good, not even one. But God looks and he sees. He's the God who hears. Psalm 5, verses 1 through 3. Give ear to my words, O Lord. Consider my sighing. Listen to my cry for help, my King and my God. For to you I pray. In the morning, O Lord, you hear my voice. In the morning I lay my request before you, and I wait with expectation. Psalm 55, verses 16 and 17. But I will call on God, and the Lord saves me. Evening, morning, and noon, I cry out in distress, and he hears my voice. Have you felt like that, where it just never ends? It's just you're in distress all the time, and you're crying out to God, and you're losing faith, you're losing hope, you're doubting everything, you're not wanting to go on, but then suddenly you remember, he has heard my voice. He is the God who sees. Maybe I'm just waiting for him to open my eyes to see the next step. 1 John 5, verses 13 through 15. I write these things to you who believe in the name of the Son of God, so that you may know that you have eternal life. This is the confidence we have in approaching God, that if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us. Psalm 6, verse 6 through 10. I am worn out from groaning all night long. I flood my bed with weeping and drench my couch with tears. My eyes grow weak with sorrow. They fail because of all my foes. Away from me, all you who do evil, for the Lord has heard my weeping. The Lord has heard my cry for mercy. The Lord accepts my prayer. All my enemies will be ashamed and dismayed. They will turn back in sudden disgrace. Psalm 34, 4 through 7. I sought the Lord, he answered me. He delivered me from all my fears. Those who look to him are radiant. Their faces are never covered with shame. This poor man called, and the Lord heard him and saved him out of all of his troubles. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he delivers them. Notice every one of these people are in the midst of trouble. Every one of them are in the midst of their anxiety. Every one of them love God. Why are they still hurting? How could Sarah be chosen and loved of God, never hear his voice until she was 90 years old and had a child? How can somebody go for 90 years brokenhearted and feeling like God had rejected them and the whole time God had chosen them? How can we go through this struggle every single day and feel as though God doesn't like us, God doesn't want us, God doesn't care about us, and we don't see that the blessing is on the way, that we still are in God's hands? God does hear us, he does see us, he walks with us, he knows us more intimately than we know ourselves. How can we go through all those times and still forget that God sees us and hears us? See, when we think all is lost, that's when we need God to open our eyes. Sometimes he opens our eyes through reading the Word. Sometimes he opens our eyes through other people. Sometimes circumstances. And maybe you're there today saying, I need to have my eyes open because right now I just don't see it. I just don't see my way through. And that's when I'll close with this verse, Psalm 143, verse 8. Let the morning bring me word of your unfailing love, for I have put my trust in you. Show me the way I should go, for to you I lift up my soul.